Today I want to talk about a few different types of sanders and what they're best used for, and this isn't about brands at all. I happen to own these Festool. I bought them, but if you own a sander from a different brand, it's really not going to have much consequence on your finished product. In fact, the Mirka is a better all-around sander than the ETS EC is. The Bosch and Makita versions of this are basically licensed versions of an older model of this from what it looks like, and they do a very comparable job as well. The only one that might make a difference in terms of brand, I don't know if there's a lot of other companies that make high-end just Orbital sanders. Mirka makes one. I have no experience with it, so I can't give you an opinion on it, but I can say that it makes very little difference in terms of what brand you buy when you're buying these, as long as you're buying a comparable brand or something high-end. If you're buying a cheaper $100 random Orbit sander, you're really not going to get the same quality out of something like this or the Mirka, but that's a completely different topic, and I don't want to get too far off, so I digress. This is about different types of sanders and what their uses are, and I'm going to use these today to smooth out this glue up that I glued together yesterday. It's mostly flat between the boards, a little bit off in some places, but that's really not that big a deal. And so now let's get into the meat of it. What are each of these used for? This is a orbital sander. It has a 3mm orbit, which means this whole pad basically just moves like this, but stays aligned in one direction. This is very good for fine finish, like sanding between your final coat of paint, lacquer, clear, just the finish details, and for getting into corners because it's got a square body. They make a Delta version of this as well, which is fantastic, and these two are the best orbital sanders I've used, the Delta and the square body of this, and they do a great job. They do not remove material fast. They are not coarse sanders. They don't have a ton of power. I don't know if they make 24 grit paper in this, but if you put one on, you probably wouldn't be doing anything except feeling the sander move in your hand. But I can't say that for sure. I haven't tried. They're just not that good at that. This is a direct drive random orbit sander, which means the motor is in a direct line straight down through the body, which drives not the pad, but something the pad is connected to with an offset orbital, which spins and either converts the motor's rotation into spin on this or orbit this way, and depending on whichever part of this has the most resistance, it will spin or orbit, hence the name random orbit. It's random in terms of whatever has the most resistance on it will cause it to change whether it's orbiting more or rotating more and give you supposed to be the quickest, finest finish, which is true. These sanders are the cat's ass in terms of fine finish across a broad range of things. If I could only own one sander and I didn't have to flatten slabs or smooth out large areas like this that are still from a planer and glued up, I would probably only own this sander and the square bodies for doing other things. But move on to the last one. This is the heaviest, coarsest sander, and this has a a gear-driven eccentric mode, where right now this is in a regular mode and it is a random orbital sander, so it'll do the same as this, but it is not a direct drive. It does not have the same RPMs out of the motor. It's not as fast at removal as this, and it's not as smooth. Like, this is definitely the smoothest sander out of them. But when you move this gear selector over and turn the pad, you hear that click, it locks into place, and then you can actually see as I spin this that the pad rotates and orbits at the same time. And this gear-driven motion, which forces it to do this, means that you can really put a little bit more pressure on this and put a heavier grit sandpaper on it, and it's going to continue that eccentric motion and give you a lot of heavier removal. You could put 24 grit sandpaper on this and it'll plow through anything. I'm gonna start flattening this with either 60 or 40, probably 40, and then I'm gonna move up to 60 and then 80, and then I'm gonna move up to this sander and use this with 100, 120, 150, 220. I'm not gonna use this sander until I get to the finish portion of this in between the coats of lacquer. So today's video is really only gonna be about these two and using them to flatten this slab. And now that I've gone through what their uses are, what their benefits are, in terms of each individual type of sander, I'll film some video of me using them, and you can see a bit of the technique of how you sand and some tips on things that are going to make it easier for you to get a consistent finish in your projects. So I've got the gear driven sander hooked up, vacuum, power, and I've got 40 grit on it, and you can kind of see I've laid out a pencil line in the motion that I'm going to be sanding in, and this is going to serve two purposes. This is just a general layout to show you the motion that you sand in, and once I've sanded in this direction here, I'm going to go back and forth. I'm going to go back and then go across that way and this way. So I've sanded in all four directions, and because it's random orbital or gear eccentric driven orbital, it's not going to leave sanding scratches, so it doesn't matter which way you sand, but it's important to sand evenly across the whole surface. The second function for the pencil line is when the pencil line's gone, I know that I've sanded the entire surface, so I can see anywhere that needs extra work or that has a little lip like we have here that I need to remove. So as you can see from that time lapse, this really didn't take that long to sand out the ridges. There's a couple little gaps in my glue up, but that's okay. It'll get filled with a little bit of filler, maybe some CA glue, whatever. When it's all done and cleared, you really won't be able to tell. It's not that major, and I'm pretty happy with it. But you could really tell the aggressive nature of that sander. And when there was a little bit of snipe here from the planer still, and I was able to lean into it a little bit heavier and remove that fairly quickly. I think it only took me maybe 3-4 minutes, I think 3 minutes to sand this whole top and get this flatter. So now I'm going to move up through the grits on this sander and get it up to 80 grit, and then I'll show you a little bit about the direct drive random orbit sander. So this is the end of the first phase of sanding, and this is done with the RO150. You can see the finish quality is rather nice. It's rather good quality. That's with 100 grit sandpaper. Not very many visible swirls. I mean, there shouldn't be any, but I'm sure there's a few I missed. And now I'm going to move up to the ETS EC, the direct drive orbital sander, and we're going to go through 120. I don't actually have 150 on further inspection, so I'm going to have to skip grits, which I don't advise doing, but you just have to spend a little bit of extra time with the 220, and you should be fine. Should be. So there you can see, in conclusion, the sanding's done. I mean, this probably took me about 15 minutes to sand this whole top. And a couple words in conclusion about if you're looking into buying one of these sanders, which one you should get. If you only want one and you do heavy removal of stock, like flattening slabs or flattening glue-ups, get the RO150 or the gear eccentric drive sander from a company. If you do more fine finish work, get the ETS 150. And if you do a mix and you still only want one, buy the Mirka. I used it for a couple weeks a little while ago. A friend of mine lent it to me, and it is more in between than anything else. It's faster removal than this, slower than this. It's not as fine a finish as this. It's not as quick as this. It's in between. It's a little bit cheaper than this, and it's probably the best all-around sander on the market. If you want to have both because you want to have the fastest removal of one type and this, I mean, still buy the Mirka. If you want faster, buy a gear-driven. In my opinion, this is the finest finish sander out of all of them, but that's, you know, my opinion, and carries only so much weight as you would put into it. I hope this helps in understanding what the difference between all these are and understanding what you should be focusing on when buying a sander of this caliber in a high-end range.